There is a man lying face down in the western Iraqi desert. It is January 1991. The temperature has dropped to -12 degrees Celsius. The wind is moving at 25 knots from the northwest, stripping the heat from his body at a rate that will kill him in hours if he stops moving. He has been walking for 6 hours in total darkness across ground that shifts and slides under every step. His burden weighs 91 kilograms. He has not eaten since yesterday. He has not slept in 31 hours. And somewhere behind him, between him and the emergency rendezvous point that represents his only chance of survival, there are Iraqi soldiers who know this desert the way he knows the streets of Hereford. He is not the patrol commander. He is not the demolitions expert. He is not the medic. He is the man nobody makes documentaries about. He is the man whose name does not appear in the books. He is the man who, at this precise moment, is lying in the freezing desert dirt with his face pressed against frozen gravel, his frozen fingers working a radio system in the dark, trying to establish a communications window that may already have closed, because if he cannot get a signal out in the next 4 minutes, the patrol's position will be unknown, their situation will be unknown, and whatever happens next will happen in complete and total silence. He is the SAS patrol signaler. And without him, nothing works. Without him, the patrol commander has no way to report what they have found, no way to call for support, no way to confirm the emergency rendezvous if the patrol is compromised, no way to transmit the intelligence that justified inserting 4 men into the most dangerous operational environment on Earth. Without him, the patrol is not a patrol. It is 4 men alone in the dark with no connection to the world that sent them there. Every documentary you have ever watched about the SAS has shown you the patrol commander planning the mission. It has shown you the medic keeping men alive under fire. It has shown you the demolitions expert destroying targets with surgical precision. It has shown you the 4-man patrol as a unit of extraordinary capability and extraordinary courage. What it has never shown you is the man carrying the heaviest load, performing the most technically complex task, under the most unforgiving conditions, in the most dangerous moment of every single operation. What it has never shown you is the man who connects the patrol to the world, or fails to, and upon whose success or failure the entire mission, and every life in that patrol, absolutely depends. This is his story. And it is darker than anything you have heard before. Because the SAS signaler does not just carry more than every other man in the patrol. He carries the one thing that cannot be replaced, cannot be improvised, cannot be sourced from the environment or fabricated in the field if it fails. He carries the communications. He carries the link between 4 men in the most hostile environment on Earth and the headquarters that is the only entity on the planet that knows they are there. And if that link breaks, if the radio fails, if the batteries die, if the encryption system malfunctions, if the transmission window closes before he can get a signal out, the patrol does not just lose communications. The patrol loses the ability to exist within any structure that can help it. It becomes invisible. It becomes unknown. It becomes 4 men in the dark who are on their own in a way that goes beyond physical isolation into something deeper and darker and more final. Because a patrol that cannot communicate cannot be extracted if it is compromised. Cannot be reinforced if it is overwhelmed. Cannot transmit the intelligence that is the entire reason it was inserted in the first place. The SAS signaler carries the weight of the mission in a way that no other specialist in the patrol carries it. The patrol commander carries the responsibility of decisions. The medic carries the responsibility of lives. The demolitions expert carries the responsibility of the target. The signaler carries all of it, because without his communications, none of the others can do their jobs, and none of their work can reach the people who need it. This is the man nobody talks about. This is the story nobody has told. Until now. To understand what the SAS patrol signaler carries, you have to understand the baseline. You have to start with what every man in the patrol carries before the specialist equipment is added, and then you have to add what the signaler carries on top of it. Every SAS patrol member carries the standard patrol burgan. In Borneo in 1963, that was approximately 50 kilograms. In the Falklands in 1982, it was approximately 54 kilograms. In western Iraq in 1991, it was between 74 and 95 kilograms depending on role. These are the loads that the broader military world found impossible to replicate, the loads that broke U.S. Rangers on Welsh mountains and Australian infantry in Brunei jungle, the loads that the SAS carries because decades of operational experience have demonstrated that the weight is the independence, and the independence is the mission. Every man in the patrol carries this. This is the baseline. This is what the patrol commander carries, what the medic carries, what the demolitions expert carries. And then the signaler picks up his radio. In Borneo in 1963, the patrol signaler carried the A41 HF set. This was a high-frequency radio system that could, under the right atmospheric conditions, establish communication with a base station hundreds of kilometers away. It weighed 9.3 kilograms with its associated batteries and handset. On top of the standard 50-kilogram patrol burgan, this brought the signaler's total carried weight to approximately 60 kilograms, the upper limit of what the Army Personnel Research Establishment had assessed as sustainable over extended distances. In practice, the weight was not the primary problem with the A41 in Borneo. The primary problem was the conditions. High-frequency radio communication depends on the ionosphere, the upper layer of the atmosphere, reflecting the signal back to Earth over long distances. The ionosphere is not stable. It changes with the time of day, with the weather, with solar activity, and with the specific geography between the transmitting and receiving stations. In the Borneo jungle, where the patrol was operating in terrain that included mountain ridgelines, dense canopy, and river valleys that created their own microweather systems, establishing a reliable HF communications window was not a technical exercise. It was an act of persistence in the face of a system that was working against you in almost every possible way. The signaler in a Borneo patrol would spend hours, sometimes the better part of a day, working the radio. Adjusting frequencies. Changing antenna orientations. Waiting for atmospheric conditions to align. Making transmission attempts at scheduled windows and missing them. Making transmission attempts outside scheduled windows and hoping someone was listening. Writing message traffic in encrypted format, transmitting it in burst mode to minimize the time the antenna was up and therefore minimize the patrol signature, and then waiting, sometimes for hours, for an acknowledgement that the message had been received. All of this while lying in primary jungle. All of this while managing the physical demands of the patrol's movement, the heat, the humidity, the insect life, and the constant requirement for tactical awareness. All of this with the knowledge that raising an antenna in enemy-controlled territory was the single most detectable thing a patrol could do, that the antenna was a flag planted in the jungle saying "Here we are, come and find us." One Borneo veteran, speaking in a post-operational debrief that has been referenced in regimental histories, described the experience of working the radio in the Borneo jungle as the loneliest job in the world. Not because the patrol was not around him, but because the radio was his alone. The commander could not help him. The medic could not help him. The demolitions expert could not help him. It was him and the machine and the ionosphere and the silence, and either the signal got through or it did not, and if it did not, he tried again, and if it still did not, he tried again, and he kept trying until it did or until the patrol situation made further attempts impossible. In western Iraq in 1991, the signaler carried the PRC-319HF set with its associated TACB personal locator beacon and 3 sets of spare batteries. Total weight for the communications package, 12.1 kilograms. On top of a standard patrol load that was already between 74 and 95 kilograms, this brought the signaler's total to a figure that, for some men, exceeded 100 kilograms. 100 kilograms. The weight of a large adult male. Carried across frozen desert gravel in the dark, at pace, for distances of between 15 and 25 kilometers per night, for up to 8 consecutive days. The PRC-319 was a significant technological advance over the A41. It was capable of burst transmission, compressing a message into a fraction of a second of transmission time, dramatically reducing the patrol's electronic signature. It had better frequency agility, allowing the signaler to shift between frequencies rapidly to find workable propagation paths. It was more reliable in extreme cold than its predecessors. But it was heavier, more complex, and more demanding of the signaler's technical competence. And it operated in an environment, the flat featureless Iraqi desert, where any antenna erected, however briefly, was visible for kilometers in every direction. The signaler in western Iraq did not just carry more. He carried more while being required to be more technically proficient, more operationally aware of his electronic signature, and more precise in his timing, because the PRC-319's burst transmission capability was only useful if the signaler could prepare his message traffic, encrypt it correctly, and transmit it within a specific and narrow window. Miss the window, and the message did not go. Miss enough windows, and the patrol became invisible to the headquarters that was the only entity on Earth that could help it. The weight nobody talks about is not just the physical weight of the radio and its batteries. It is the weight of knowing that if you fail, if the batteries die and you did not manage them correctly, if the encryption fails and you cannot diagnose why, if the window closes and you were not ready, the consequences are not measured in embarrassment or professional failure. They are measured in lives. In 4 men who needed you to get a signal out and didn't. In a headquarters that needed to know where the patrol was and doesn't. In an emergency rendezvous that nobody knows needs to be activated because the signal that would have activated it never arrived. That is the weight the signaler carries. And it never leaves him, in the field or out of it. There is a moment that happens on every compromised SAS patrol. A moment that is so compressed in time and so absolute in its consequence that it defines the signaler's role more completely than any training program or operational briefing ever could. The patrol is compromised. The enemy knows they are there. The next 60 seconds will determine whether 4 men live or die. The patrol commander is already issuing contact drills. The medic is assessing whether anyone is hit. The demolitions expert is covering the withdrawal route. Every man knows his job and is doing it simultaneously, because that is what the training produces, for men moving independently toward the same survival outcome without requiring direction. And the signaler has one job. One job that overrides everything else. One job that must be done in the next 60 seconds regardless of what is happening around him, regardless of the incoming fire, regardless of the noise and the darkness and the confusion and the fear. He has to get a contact report out. Not because the contact report will save him in the next 60 seconds. It will not. Nothing in the next 60 seconds is going to save him except his own training and the training of the 3 men around him. The contact report will not bring helicopters in time. It will not redirect air support in time. It will not change the immediate tactical situation in any way. But it will mean that headquarters knows the patrol is compromised. It will mean that the emergency rendezvous is activated. It will mean that the search and rescue assets are alerted. It will mean that 4 men who are about to run for their lives in the dark across hostile terrain are not running into a complete communications void where nobody knows they are there and nobody is looking for them. And it will mean that if the worst happens, if the patrol is reduced from 4 men to 3 or 2 or 1, the headquarters that is the only entity that can help will know what happened, where it happened, and what the surviving members of the patrol will be trying to do next. The contact report is not for now. It is for what comes after now. And getting it out, in the middle of a firefight, with the patrol already in contact, with the signaler's body flooded with adrenaline and every instinct screaming at him to move and run and survive, requires a quality of technical proficiency and psychological control under pressure that is, by any objective measure, one of the most demanding things any soldier in any army is asked to do. The signaler has to stop. In a contact, he has to stop and work his radio. while other men are moving. While fire is coming in. He has to be still enough to operate his equipment, clear-headed enough to transmit a coherent message, and fast enough to do it before the patrol's movement makes his position untenable. In Borneo, in 1965, there is a documented account, referenced in regimental operational records and subsequently in open-source historical accounts of the confrontacy, of a patrol signaller transmitting a contact report while in the prone position behind a fallen tree, with Indonesian forces within 200 meters of the patrol position. The transmission took 4 minutes. During those 4 minutes, the rest of the patrol was conducting an active fighting withdrawal. The signaller completed his transmission, collapsed his antenna, and moved. The patrol reached its emergency rendezvous. The contact report he transmitted was the reason the extraction was waiting for them. In western Iraq in 1991, the signaller's job acquired an additional dimension of difficulty that Borneo had not required. The Iraqi desert offered no cover. There were no fallen trees, no riverbanks, no terrain features that could provide the 30 seconds of concealment the signaller needed to work his equipment. The flat featureless desert meant that any pause in movement, any moment when one man stopped while 3 moved, was visible. And in the dark, in the cold, with Iraqi forces active in the area and the threat of compromise constantly present, the signaller's requirement to stop and transmit was not just technically demanding. It was potentially suicidal. The solution that SAS signalers developed for the Iraqi desert, referenced in open-source accounts from Gulf War veterans, was to transmit on the move. To prepare message traffic while walking, to have the encryption ready before the transmission window opened, to begin the transmission at the precise moment the window opened and complete it before the patrol's movement took the antenna out of the optimal orientation for the propagation path. This required a level of multitasking, navigating, maintaining patrol spacing, managing the radio, preparing encrypted traffic, monitoring for enemy activity, that pushed the human cognitive system to its absolute limit. And it required doing all of this while carrying more weight than any other man in the patrol. While being the most physically burdened member of a patrol whose physical burdens were already beyond the tolerance of most trained soldiers. While knowing that the radio on his back was the only thing standing between 4 men and total operational invisibility. There is a former SAS signaller, speaking in a post-service interview referenced in military oral history records, who described the experience of transmitting under pressure in the Gulf War with a directness that no operational briefing ever matched. He said that the hardest part was not the technical complexity. It was not the weight. It was not the cold or the dark or the physical exhaustion. The hardest part was the knowledge of what failure meant. Not just for him. For the 3 men who were depending on him to succeed. That knowledge, he said, was heavier than the radio. And unlike the radio, you could not put it down when the mission was over. The history of SAS communications equipment is, in one sense, a history of technological progress. From the heavy, temperamental HF sets of the Borneo era to the digital encrypted burst transmission systems of the Afghanistan deployments, the equipment has become lighter, more reliable, more capable, and less detectable. The signaller's technical burden has shifted from managing the physical limitations of primitive radio systems to managing the operational security requirements of sophisticated digital communications in environments saturated with enemy electronic intelligence. But in a deeper sense, the history of SAS communications is a history of a single unchanging problem: how do you maintain reliable communications between a small autonomous patrol operating in total isolation and a headquarters that needs to know what the patrol knows, in conditions that are designed by geography, weather, and enemy action to make that communication impossible? The A41 HF set that the Borneo signalers carried was a transitional piece of equipment that bridged the gap between the genuinely primitive radio systems of the Second World War and the more capable sets that would follow. It was heavy, temperamental, and deeply dependent on atmospheric conditions that were outside the signaler's control. But it could, under the right conditions, establish communication over distances that no other available system could match. And in Borneo, where the distances between patrol and base were measured in hundreds of kilometers of impenetrable jungle, the ability to establish that communication, however unreliable, however demanding, was the difference between a patrol that was connected to its command structure and a patrol that was operating in complete independence with no ability to report, request, or respond. The Falklands Campaign of 1982 introduced a different set of communications challenges. The terrain of East Falkland, open, exposed, with no significant tree cover and limited topographic masking, made antenna erection a dramatically more visible and therefore more dangerous activity than it had been in the Borneo jungle. The weather, constant high winds, horizontal precipitation, temperatures that dropped well below freezing at night, degraded radio performance in ways that were difficult to predict and harder to compensate for. And the operational tempo of the Falklands Campaign, which was significantly higher than the long slow patrols of the Borneo era, compressed the time available for establishing communications windows. The PRC-320 and its associated systems that SAS signalers used in the Falklands represented a significant improvement over the Borneo-era equipment, but they were still fundamentally HF systems dependent on the same atmospheric physics that had made Borneo communications so unreliable. The signalers who operated them in the Falklands described conditions that tested the equipment and the men operating it to their limits, working frozen radio controls with frozen fingers, erecting antennas in 40-knot winds, attempting scheduled transmission windows in weather that degraded propagation to the point of uselessness, and finding solutions because there was no alternative to finding solutions. By the Gulf War in 1991, the PRC-319 with its burst transmission capability represented a qualitative leap in the signaler's operational toolkit. Burst transmission, the ability to compress a message into a fraction of a second of actual transmission time, transformed the signaler's relationship with the most dangerous element of his job, the electronic signature. In Borneo, a transmission could last minutes. In the Falklands, a transmission could last tens of seconds. In the Gulf War, the critical content of a contact report could be transmitted in under a second. The antenna was up and down before any direction-finding equipment could take a reliable bearing. But the PRC-319 introduced a new and more demanding form of technical complexity. Burst transmission required the signaler to prepare his message traffic in advance, to encrypt it correctly using the patrol's current cipher settings, and to have everything ready before the transmission window opened. The window itself was measured in minutes, sometimes seconds. Miss it, and the next opportunity might be hours away, hours during which the patrol situation could change in ways that made the original message irrelevant or critically insufficient. In Afghanistan and Iraq in the 2000s, the communications revolution that transformed conventional military operations, satellite communications, digital data links, real-time intelligence fusion, created both new capabilities and new demands for the SAS signaler. The ability to transmit real-time imagery, digital intelligence reports, and encrypted voice communications transformed the quality of information flow between patrol and headquarters. But it multiplied the signaler's technical responsibilities to a degree that previous generations would have found incomprehensible. The contemporary SAS signaler manages not one communication system but multiple simultaneously, HF for long-range backup, satellite for primary secure voice and data, personal locator beacons for emergency extraction, encrypted digital links for intelligence reporting. Each system has its own operating procedures, its own security protocols, its own power management requirements, and its own failure modes. The technical competence required to operate all of them, in all conditions, under operational stress, while carrying a load that would be extraordinary by any other military standard, represents a level of human performance that the military world has never fully acknowledged. Because the signaler is never the story. The signaler is always the support. He is always the man in the background, the man whose success is invisible because when everything works, nothing remarkable seems to have happened, and whose failure is catastrophic in ways that the broader narrative of the patrol attributes to circumstances rather than to the specific and precise failure of a specific and precise man to do a specific and precise job under impossible conditions. The operational history of SAS communications failures is, by its nature, partially classified and deeply uncomfortable to examine. Because communications failures are not equipment failures in the way that a weapon jamming is an equipment failure. They are systemic failures that occur at the intersection of equipment, operator, conditions, and circumstance, and the attribution of failure across those factors is never clean, never simple, and never without consequence for the men involved. But the open-source record, the published memoirs, the historical accounts, the after-action references that have been declassified or voluntarily disclosed by veterans, contains enough information to trace the outline of what happens when the communications link fails, and what that failure costs. In Borneo, the primary communications failure mode was atmospheric. The ionosphere did not cooperate. The HF signal did not propagate. The patrol transmitted into silence and received nothing back. In these situations, the established procedure was to attempt alternate frequencies, alternate antenna configurations, alternate transmission times. And if all else failed, if the patrol could not establish communication through any available means, to continue the mission and attempt communication at the next scheduled window, and the next, until either communication was established or the patrol reached a point where it could physically move to a position where communication was possible. This sounds manageable in a briefing room. In the Borneo jungle, it meant patrols that were out of communication with their base for days at a time, operating in enemy-controlled territory with no ability to report their position, no ability to request support, and no way to know whether the operational picture they were working from was still accurate. The patrol commander made decisions based on the last intelligence he had received, which might be a week old. The base made assessments based on the last communication it had received, which might be equally old. And in the gap between those two partial pictures, for men were moving through primary jungle toward objectives that might no longer be relevant, against enemy forces whose dispositions might have changed entirely. The Falklands produced a communications failure of a different kind. During the land campaign, SAS elements operating ahead of the main force axis of advance found themselves in situations where the requirement for radio silence, the tactical necessity of not transmitting because transmission would reveal their position to enemy forces, conflicted directly with the headquarters requirement for real-time reporting of enemy positions and movements. Patrols that had critical intelligence could not transmit it. Headquarters that needed that intelligence could not receive it. The information existed. It was in the heads of the men on the ground. It could not move. This is the darkest version of the communications failure problem. Not the failure of the equipment. Not the failure of atmospheric conditions. But the tactical situation in which the patrol cannot use its communications because using them will kill the patrol. The signaler who cannot transmit is not failing at his job. He is doing his job, preserving the patrol's security by maintaining silence. But the cost of that silence is the intelligence that the patrol was inserted to collect, sitting in 4 men's heads on a hillside in the Falklands, unable to reach the people who need it. The Gulf War produced the most publicly documented SAS communications failure of the modern era. The patrol known as Bravo 20, 8 men inserted into western Iraq in January 1991 to conduct surveillance of Iraqi Scud missile supply routes, was compromised within hours of insertion. What followed was one of the most catastrophic sequences in the regiment's modern operational history. 3 men died. 4 were captured. 1 escaped to Syria on foot across 300 kilometers of desert. The mission failed completely. The communications dimension of the Bravo 20 disaster is documented in the accounts of the survivors and in subsequent analyses of what went wrong. The patrol's communications with headquarters were problematic from the moment of insertion. The radio equipment that the patrol carried was not performing as expected in the specific atmospheric and geographic conditions of their insertion area. The scheduled communication windows were missed. The patrol situation, which was deteriorating rapidly, was not being fully transmitted to the headquarters that could potentially have responded to it. The full complexity of what went wrong with Bravo 20's communications has never been definitively established in the public record. The survivors' accounts differ on specific details. The headquarters' perspective has never been fully disclosed. What is clear is that the communications link, the one thing that connected 8 men in the most dangerous environment on Earth to the organization that had put them there, failed to function as it needed to at the moment when it was most critically needed. And in that failure, in that silence, 8 men became 8 men completely alone. The signaler of Bravo 20 carried every ounce of the weight that this chapter has described. He carried the radio. He carried the responsibility. He worked his equipment in conditions that were working against him in every possible way. And the outcome, the silence, the isolation, the catastrophe, was not a simple story of equipment failure or operator failure or conditions failure. It was the story of what happens when everything goes wrong at once for the one man whose job it is to make sure something goes right. That man is the one nobody talks about. That man is the signaler. Every SAS soldier passes selection. The hills, the weights, the distances, the attrition, the process that produces the badged trooper is among the most demanding military selection processes in the world. The men who pass it are not ordinary soldiers. They are the specific subset of the military population who can think clearly under extreme physical stress, manage their resources intelligently over extended time periods, and make consistently good decisions when the consequences of bad decisions are immediate and personal. But within the badged regiment, a further selection takes place. Not a formal selection with a defined pass or fail criterion. A selection by demonstrated competence, by temperament, by the specific combination of technical aptitude and psychological profile that makes a man suited to carrying the radio. The signaler role within the SAS patrol is not assigned randomly. It is not rotated on a schedule. The man who carries the radio is the man who has demonstrated the specific qualities that the role demands, qualities that go beyond technical proficiency with radio equipment, beyond the ability to operate an encryption system, beyond the ability to manage power consumption across the patrol's battery reserves. The qualities that define the SAS signaler are patience and precision and the absolute refusal to panic. Patience, because radio communications in the environments where the SAS operates require the willingness to attempt and fail and attempt again, for hours, without losing the composure that the technical precision of the work requires. Precision, because the consequences of imprecision in message preparation, in encryption, in timing, are not the consequences of a typing error. They are the consequences of a message that does not go, or a message that goes incorrectly, or a message that is intercepted because the encryption was wrong. And the refusal to panic, because the moment when the radio is most urgently needed is always the moment when everything else is going wrong simultaneously, and the signaler must find and maintain the stillness inside that storm that the work requires. These are not qualities that can be taught in a classroom. They can be identified in a selection process. They can be developed through training. But at their core, they are qualities of character, the specific character of a man who can hold himself very still inside chaos and do precise technical work while the world is ending around him. The SAS has always known this. The regiment's internal culture around the signaler role carries a specific and rarely articulated respect that goes beyond the formal acknowledgement of specialist competence. The men who have served in the patrol role describe the signaler in terms that are consistently different from the terms they use to describe other patrol members. Not more heroic. Not more physically capable. But carrying a different quality of responsibility, a different relationship with the mission, a different kind of weight. Because every other specialist in the patrol can fail and the patrol can adapt. The patrol commander can be incapacitated and command can pass. The medic can be hit and another man can administer first aid. The demolitions expert can be compromised and the demolitions objective can be aborted or reassigned. But the signaler cannot fail. There is no backup. There is no alternative. There is no other man in the patrol who carries the knowledge, the equipment, and the capability to replace him. When the signaler cannot do his job, the patrol goes dark. And a patrol that goes dark in the SAS operational environment is a patrol that is entirely and terrifyingly alone. The documented operational record of SAS signalers who have served across the major theaters of the regiment's modern history contains names that are almost entirely unknown to the public. This is partly the nature of the regiment, the culture of anonymity that protects operational security and reflects the institutional preference for collective rather than individual recognition. But it is also something more specific and more revealing. The patrol commander's decisions are the ones that get documented. The medic's interventions are the ones that get recorded in the after-action medical assessments. The demolitions expert's work is visible in the physical evidence of destroyed targets and completed objectives. But the signaler's work, the hours of patient radio management, the contact reports transmitted under fire, the communications windows that were kept open when atmospheric conditions and enemy proximity were both working against keeping them open, is visible only in its absence. The mission proceeds because the communications worked. Nobody documents communications that worked, any more than they document breathing that worked. The mission fails, or the patrol is lost, or the emergency rendezvous is not reached, and suddenly the communications become central to every analysis and every account. The silence becomes the story. But the silence is attributed to conditions, to circumstances, to the cascade of failures that produced the crisis. Rarely, in the public record, is the silence attributed to a specific man who carried a specific radio and could not make it work when it needed to work. This is the final and deepest dimension of the weight the SAS signaler carries. Not the physical weight of the radio and its batteries, though that weight is real and it is greater than what any other man in the patrol carries. Not the technical weight of the communications responsibility, though that weight is genuine and unshared. But the weight of invisibility. The weight of a role whose success is taken for granted and whose failure is catastrophic and public and permanent. There is a former SAS warrant officer, speaking in an oral history interview referenced in military academic research, who served as a patrol signaler across multiple operational deployments spanning the Falklands and the Gulf War. He was asked, near the end of his service, what he wanted people to understand about the role that he had not seen captured anywhere in the public accounts of the regiment. He thought about it for a long time before he answered. He said that what he wanted people to understand was this: every time you read about an SAS patrol that completed its mission, there was a man in that patrol who spent the entire mission carrying more than everyone else, working harder than everyone else at something that nobody could help him with, and succeeding at something that nobody would ever fully acknowledge. And every time you read about an SAS patrol that did not complete its mission, that was compromised, that was destroyed, that left men behind, there was a man in that patrol who carried the same weight and worked the same hours and tried just as hard, and for whom the difference between success and failure was sometimes as small as the difference between an ionosphere that cooperated and one that did not. He said that he wanted people to understand that the signaler is not a technician. He is not a specialist in the diminished sense that the word sometimes carries in military usage, implying a man who does one thing and cannot do others. The SAS signaler is a complete soldier who also carries the communications. He fights when he has to fight. He navigates when navigation is needed. He provides medical support when the medic is down. He is everything the patrol requires him to be. And on top of all of that, on top of the standard patrol load and the standard patrol demands, he carries the radio and makes it work. He said, next time you watch a documentary about the SAS, notice who they do not talk about. Notice the silence where the signaler should be. And understand that the silence around him is exactly the same silence he spent his career trying to prevent. There is a man lying face down in the western Iraqi desert. He has been there before. He will be there again. In different deserts, in different jungles, in different frozen mountains, in different cities where the buildings compress the radio signal and the enemy's electronic intelligence is sophisticated enough to detect a transmission in milliseconds. He is always the same man. He carries more than everyone else. He does the work that nobody can share and nobody can replace. He succeeds in silence and fails in catastrophe. He connects four men in the darkest place on earth to the world that sent them there, or he does not, and in the not, for men become the most alone that any human beings have ever been. The patrol commander gives the orders. The medic saves the lives. The demolitions expert destroys the targets. These men are the story. Their decisions, their courage, their sacrifice, these are the things that get documented, remembered, and told. And the signaler picks up his radio. He checks his batteries. He calculates his transmission windows. He prepares his encrypted message traffic. He finds a position that is not completely exposed and not completely useless for propagation and tries to balance operational security against the absolute necessity of communication. He does all of this in the dark, in the cold, under weight that would break most men, with the knowledge that if he fails, nobody is coming. He is the most important man in the patrol. He is the one nobody ever talks about. Now you know his name. You have always known his name. You just never knew that was him. He is the man who kept the silence from becoming permanent. He is the SAS patrol signaler. And he deserves every word of this.